when inflation is well above the Bank of England's target, right? When interest rates are going up, causing mortgage repayments to become more expensive, for example. When everything from the price of your food shop to power in your car, that's all going up. And Brits are saying, hang on a minute, I want a little bit of respite here. What does this levelling up thing actually mean? And apparently 70% of Brits polled by the pollster Comres are actually saying that they're concerned now about the financial impact of increased energy costs. And Andrew, I'm afraid to tell you that my real fear is that we are just seeing the very start of the cost of the true cost of the government's pet project, the sort of middle-class green extreme project in net zero, in my view, which will immiserate communities like this one up here in County Durham. And that's my fear, that this is just a taste of things to come in pursuit of that radical policy of net zero.
So your view of this is that this is very much to do with environmentalism and that sort of agenda. And it is true, isn't it? There are general fears that whenever those, however you feel about it, whenever those policies are pursued, it always impacts the poorest in society. And what I don't understand about this, isn't there a way that they can do... I mean, they clearly have a lot of money. They have enough money for furlough. Isn't there a way that they can prioritise this so that poorer people don't get, hit with a sledgehammer at this time of year?
I don't know how working class families are going to really take that burden, shoulder that burden. I really, really don't. I think government is actually going to have to intervene, and I say that as an economic liberal, right? It's not the sort of thing I would normally be calling for, but it just strikes me as this government being, frankly, a little bit out of touch. I mean, you've got them pushing, for example, electric cars, right? You're talking 45% more expensive than similar comparable petrol-powered vehicles. And then these heat pump things, remember those? 10 grand to install those, and they might not even warm your house entirely as a traditional gas boiler would at a fraction of the price. And this is what gets me, right? This is what I'm really, really quite troubled by. It's that Boris Johnson isn't going to be around to have to deal with the true political fallout of all of these costs, right? The sort of paternalistic green pet projects. But I do think, and MPs like Steve Baker have been warning this, one of the most prominent Tory rebels, that the Conservative Party are going to end up ultimately paying a price, not just at the pump, but at the ballot box, in the fact that he actually compares it to Margaret Thatcher's poll tax, right, where you had a real political upset there, and she ultimately lost. She was kicked out of number 10 by her own party. And I'm just really worried about the immiseration, ultimately, as you say, of the least well-off in society in order to appease what I call the middle-class green extreme. I'm really worried about that, and frankly, I think it's completely incompatible with any true levelling up agenda. I really, really do.
You talk about the poll tax there, and it strikes me that whenever there are these sort of policy measures that are deeply unpopular with the voting public, there's almost a kind of tone deafness that's going on there. Is it the case that we're just dealing with a political elite that just have no connection whatsoever with ordinary working people? I mean, in the past, parliamentarians used to come from all walks of life, and you would have people who'd been in the mines and they ended up in Parliament. And it seems to me that's not the case now with the way that Parliament works. It's very much a kind of a vocational thing. You go to Oxford, you do your PPE degree, and then you're into Parliament. It's a different world now. And is that part of the problem?
I think it is, actually, yeah. I think, going from a cushy job in a think tank in Westminster straight into Parliament, for example, which is the route now, you're right. You don't have... It used to be the case that Labour would put forward those that worked in the mines in areas like this, right? It used to be the case that there would be a real representation of the working class in Parliament. And again, I'm starting to sound like a little bit of a sort of left-wing social justice activist here, Andrew, which might surprise you all. But I do feel that, and it's speaking about these things in really quite abstract terms, right, as far as net zero is concerned, and these are the radical policy proposals. And then you've got them talking about things like a meat tax, for example, and I'm just like, what world are you living in? Have you ever struggled to put food on your table? Have you ever been embarrassed enough to have to go to a food bank or something like that to actually feel that these zany ideas that we simply haven't been asked about, and there isn't a democratic mandate for, in my view. I'm increasingly of the view and of the real sense of concern that there just simply isn't any democratic oversight of this stuff. We're just pushing it all through. We're just saying, right, everything's going to be hunky-dory, Andrew. It'll be fine. It'll sort itself out. You know, there is some technology coming galloping down the hill like a sort of valiant knight on a white steed. Well, I'm afraid that isn't good enough, right? People need to know how they're going to get through the next few months, frankly.
Yeah, I mean,
and
I can completely understand that if this was a gradual increase, if it was something relatively small, then they could get away with it.
Yeah.
This is absolutely astronomical. I mean,
huge.
to the extent that it will plunge people into poverty. And, you know, I mean, am I getting this? I mean, look, the Tory party at present are not doing particularly well in the polls. They're losing a lot of support over, obviously, you know, the sleaze elements and also, of course, the parties that they had in Downing Street. Could this be this kind of thing? Could this be the nail in the coffin? Could this be the thing that opens the door for Labour to rebuild the Red Wall?
Well, I think if Labour really start to get their head around what it is actually that's happening to the British people at the moment, I'm afraid to say that I'm not that convinced either by the argument that the Labour Party are any more in touch with what's actually going on out there in the country than the Conservative Party are, because ultimately, right, they are all pushing the same agenda. There isn't that much of a difference between the two parties as far as their economic policy is concerned at the moment. And I think the one way in which you can get voters to take notice and start to talk about politics is by hitting them in the pockets. They are about to be hit in the pockets in a way in which they haven't been since the financial crash, right, Andrew? That is pretty extraordinary. That is really going to hurt families, communities and bank balances. And ultimately, when that happens, voters start to take note. The Labour Party do have a unique opportunity here. I really do think that after a decade of Tory power, right, more than a decade of Tory power, they should be absolutely romping home at a time of economic crisis. It's a damning indictment on them that they're not really cutting through in any real meaningful way. Yes, there's been a bounce in the polls, but nothing major, you know, nothing to suggest that they're going to win an outright majority or anything like that. But if they do start to actually turn around and say, right, here's what we're going to do to help you, here's the Conservative Party simply aren't getting serious enough on this, we need to have a conversation on what it is that we're going to do to actually, as you say, balance the burden on the poorest in society. We need to have that conversation. There needs to be that democratic oversight, but there simply isn't any scrutiny or accountability on this stuff. That's what gets me.